Today I announced my plan to retire from Nintendo effective December 31st, 2025. So that's it then, the end of another era for Nintendo. Doug Bowser, the president of Nintendo of America, just announced that he will be retiring by the end of the year, with his replacement Devin Pritchard set to replace him as the new president on January 1st, 2026. And whilst his message was certainly heartfelt, the collective response from the internet can basically be summed up as, what did bro do exactly? Aside from his debut where he joked about his coincidentally villainous name, he's kept a relatively low profile during his 6-year tenure as president. And with Nintendo's public image taking more than a few hits in the past couple of years, it begs the question, was he a good president? And that's basically what I want to dig into. I want to find out what Bowser's been up to since he took over from Reggie back in 2019. I want to find out where Nintendo currently stands, and also find out who are the new people set to take over from his place and are set to run Nintendo of America for the foreseeable future. I gotta be honest, I don't think a lot is going to change from a consumer standpoint, but there are a couple of interesting details here that I think are worth mentioning. Before we dive in, I think it's worth clearing up what the president of Nintendo of America actually does, because there seems to be a lot of confusion about that online, with Bowser getting a lot of heat for some of Nintendo's more recent choices that I think is a little misplaced. While President of Nintendo of America sounds like a top dog role, it's more of a regional leadership position rather than the ultimate seat of power. The real headquarters is in Kyoto, Japan, where Nintendo's global president and executives make all of the big calls on hardware and strategy. The American president's job is to lead efforts in marketing, sales, localization, and basically keep the brand strong in the West. More so a figurehead rather than a major decision maker. But when it comes to dictating what consoles get made or what games get greenlit and everything else in between, all of that still comes from Japan. So basically, they're the face of Nintendo for us in the West, but the real power stays in Kyoto. So Bowser took over Nintendo of America on April of 2019, right after Reggie ended his 13-year-long tenure as the previous president. And let's be honest here, he had some pretty big shoes to fill. Reggie wasn't just your average executive. He was actually, dare I say, he was one of the few likable ones. Yes, they did actually exist back then. Reggie was the type of corpo who wasn't afraid to be a bit silly, who leaned into some of the quirky marketing and was somebody that was, well, actively involved, who wasn't afraid to really push the boundaries, especially near the beginning.
I'm gonna be able to come back up next time and kick your ass.
He was out and about, his
Body is ready.
he appeared in various skits, and the Nintendo community really liked him throughout the years. He even has the whole story of pushing for Wii Sports as an included game within the Wii console. Now, he wasn't perfect, he had to defend less popular moves by Nintendo, and he was part of the company for some of the rougher console launches, but needless to say, when it came to establishing Nintendo's presence here, he did that in more ways than one. So when Bowser entered the fray, nobody really knew what to expect from the guy. Yeah, he had been with Nintendo for a couple of years, but a lot of people were quick to point out his previous employment at a certain company. Aside from his initial debut, he really hasn't appeared in a lot of directs. And whilst he has popped up in a few events and interviews over the past couple of years, he didn't exactly have the same showmanship as his in-game counterpart did. He didn't exactly have the same appeal as Reggie, nowhere near close. Though during his 6 years as president, there have been a few notable successes, and I would still count these because Nintendo is a global company after all, and it needs to succeed not only in Japan, but in the countless other countries where it also sells hardware and games. He's overseen the second half of the Nintendo Switch's life cycle in the West, which, as of recording, has sold 150 million units worldwide, becoming the second best-selling console to date, just behind the Nintendo DS. Whether it is the best console to date, that's really up for debate, and honestly I'm more inclined to lean towards the Wii anyway. There's also been a massive push by Nintendo outside of gaming, going into films like the Super Mario movie, which everybody practically memed the casting for, including NA stars like Chris Pratt, Jack Black, Charlie Day and so on, with a Galaxy sequel on the way too. Not to mention supporting the push by Nintendo to create theme parks like Super Nintendo World and the upcoming Pokepark Kanto that is being built. Can't say I've been there myself, but I've heard from family and friends that it's a good time, even if it's an attraction mainly catered towards children. Not to mention he helped steer Nintendo of America through the pandemic, a time when lockdowns drove a massive boom in gaming, since people suddenly had a lot more time on their hands. I think one of the things Doug Bowser can hang his hat on is the release of the Switch 2 earlier this year, but that is very much a last minute sort of thing, because aside from that, there aren't really a lot of headline grabbing things that you could really associate with Doug Bowser, which is why a lot of people have this sentiment of, wait, what did bro do exactly? And let's not ignore the elephant in the room here. Nintendo's reputation has taken quite a beating in the past couple of years, especially in recent months, thanks to some polarizing decisions made by the company, and Doug Bowser had to be right at the center of it all for better or for worse. The Nintendo Switch 2 is one of the fastest selling consoles to date, and people are not happy about that. The console is considered to be way too overpriced for performance equivalent to, well, last gen. Although with recent price increases from Xbox and PlayStation, it's less egregious now by comparison. Don't get me wrong, I still think it's a bad deal, but it looks like the industry has turned into a race to the bottom between the three giants of gaming. Nobody has quite forgiven Nintendo yet for charging for a tech demo to show you, well, you know, how the console works. Nintendo has always been a bit fussy about what it's willing to give away for free, and quite frankly, the Wii Sports thing was a miracle in itself. Now, working a handheld console isn't exactly rocket science, but considering that the vast majority of Nintendo's audience is quite young, it really wouldn't have gone amiss to add it for free. And let's not forget how Nintendo became the first company to break the dam and charge $80 for a game, which stings even more because Nintendo is not known for lowering its prices over time, not to mention paying that kind of money for a keycard that doesn't even contain the full game. And all of this on top of the other things going on with Nintendo at the moment. The talk of the town at the moment is the ongoing lawsuit against Power World, a survival monster catching game that became a smash hit when it first launched. So much so that the Pokemon Company and Nintendo couldn't really turn a blind eye and filed a patent infringement lawsuit instead against Power's developer Pocket Pair. And from that lawsuit, Nintendo has decided to go after the modding community, saying that it's not counted as prior art because it requires a base game to use, completely ignoring the fact that things like microtransactions and DLCs exist, things that can only be used with a base game in mind. And speaking of patents, Nintendo's new patent filing around sub-characters has also raised a few eyebrows, focusing on a specific flow of summoning a creature, starting a battle against an enemy, or following the player if there is no encounter to be made. Though critics argue that it's overly broad, rather vague, and discourages innovation, that enforcing patents will only limit indie developers who may steer clear of similar mechanics out of fear of legal trouble, lest they invite the wrath of Nintendo's lawyers. And I don't really see a lot of people bring this up now, but Nintendo has been extremely, I think annoying is a good word to describe it, against tournaments like Smash and whatnot. Nintendo recently started to crack down on tournament organizers that hadn't really asked for permission beforehand, alongside enforcing all these specific requirements depending on the size of the event. It even forced a charity speedrunning event called RTA, which had featured Nintendo games for almost a decade, to remove its titles because the charity event didn't get approval, only chasing them up about it in the last possible moment, meaning that they didn't really have enough time to sort everything out before the event began, meaning that those specific games had to be dropped. Even though the president of Nintendo of America has some influence on certain matters, the final say ultimately lies with leadership in Kyoto. That being said, because they are essentially the face of the company in the West, they end up getting the majority of the heat whenever there's controversy, say the rise of the $80 price tag for the Switch 2 games. It kinda comes with the job and why they get paid the big bucks. Which leads to my final points of who will replace Doug Bowser when he leaves by the end of the year and is set to lead Nintendo of America from 2026 onwards. Because the new president has already got off to a bit of a rough start, and I'd argue through no fault of her own. From January 1st, 2026 onwards, Devon Pritchard, I think I'm pronouncing that right, will become the new president, and the first woman to hold the role, which I've already seen some pushback on. Which, I mean, calm down, she's not the boogeyman for crying out loud. But regardless, she isn't somebody who's just appeared out of thin air. She's an experienced businesswoman who's been with Nintendo for nearly 20 years, and is currently the Executive Vice President of Revenue, Marketing and Consumer Experience at Nintendo of America. Man, that's a long title. But already some people are a little apprehensive, and I'm curious to know why exactly. I've dug around online a bit, and it seems like most of the chatter boils down to one thing: her legal background, from a law education to heading Nintendo's legal department back in 2006, before eventually moving into leadership roles in marketing, business affairs, and publisher relations. Basically, the argument people make is that since Nintendo has been pretty aggressive legally over the past few years, some were hoping the new president would push for a bit more leniency within the company. But with Devon Pritchard taking the wheel, many fear that she will further encourage it instead. But as we've already noted, the president doesn't actually have as much power as people are led to believe, especially since there will be a new leadership dynamic within Nintendo of America, which we'll go over in a moment. But it's strange to me that just because she's spoken about a few patent lawsuits in the past, some folks are assuming that she'll be a patent lawyer or a numbers corpo for Nintendo. Honestly, I think that's jumping the gun a bit. It's hard to say how she will fare in the role when she hasn't even taken up the role yet. And while I am of the mindset that not much is really going to change with this leadership shakeup, like prices aren't going to suddenly drop as soon as she's promoted, I'm also not going out of my way to pray for her downfall, you know? Especially since there's going to be a joint effort in the American region from now on. What do I mean? Well, the news I don't really see a lot of people talking about is that Nintendo of America is getting a new CEO, Satoru Shibata, starting November 16th, 2025, which in terms of hierarchy is essentially above the president. He will continue his roles as Nintendo's managing executive officer and corporate director, and remains a member of the board. This guy is no joke. He's been with the company since 1985, 40 years with Nintendo, and he was the former president of Nintendo of Europe for 18 years. He's a bit of a personality himself, which I think has been sorely missing from Nintendo's branches for the past couple of years. It's a notable return to a dual leadership structure for Nintendo of America, a setup that hasn't really been in place since Satoru Iwata's tenure ended with his passing in 2015. There's a little bit of confusion over what exactly the differences are between the two roles. From my best understanding, the CEO is the top leader and main liaison to the global headquarters in Japan, handling the overall direction of Nintendo of America. In stark contrast, the president handles more day-to-day operations, marketing and whatnot under the guidance of the CEO. Bowser's left the keys to his castle for, well, whatever comes next is really anybody's guess, but he did share online that it wasn't really a game over scenario for him, but rather another chance to level up, whatever that means. Well, it's undeniable that he didn't exactly have the same appeal as Reggie did back in his heyday. Sure, he appeared in a couple of Twitter posts and stuff like that, but he was definitely a lot more of a behind the scenes kind of guy. And whilst being a quirky personality doesn't exactly make you a good executive in the eyes of the gaming community, it definitely says a lot when the majority of people practically forgot that he was running the show. On the other hand, a lot of the controversies that happened during his tenure, from the price increases to the patent debates, made him a very easy target for criticism, even if a lot of that fault lies with the leadership in Kyoto. Overall, his success, if you could even call it that, has mostly been in keeping Nintendo relevant within the West, even if a lot of people can't necessarily attribute how he was able to pull that off. I see a lot of people praying on Devon's downfall, but I'm also seeing a lot of people hopeful that she'll be a lot more proactive and really put herself out there, similar to how Reggie was back in his prime. Like I said, I don't really think this leadership shakeup is really going to change a lot of things. There's a lot of issues within Nintendo's practices at the moment that will take a lot more than a change in figurehead to really resolve. But I'm interested to see how it all play out, so thanks for tuning in and I'll catch you next time.